welcome back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. This week we are covering a host of topics that appeared more recently in the limelight. They were in the news, and there's a particular supplement that's been gaining quite a bit of popularity after some bigger names started using and promoting it. And so naturally, when something like that happens, we start to get questions about it. And so I like to cover it, especially on the podcast where you can be a little more elaborate in the explanation than you can be on the Instagram Friday FAQs that we've done for so long. And so I wanted to be sure to revisit this topic. So you're really going to hear three things in this one, and you can decide early on if this is worth listening to you or not. And if not, you can shut it down now. But we hope that it's interesting and that you'll listen to all of them. So the three things that we'll cover today are, number one, the supplement and the product that I am referencing is Ketone IQ. And probably the instance that has come up most recently that people are familiar with is with Cam and Truett Haynes. Truett Haynes was pounding these during his successful world record attempt of the most pull-ups in 24 hours. And so this is a product that people have been kind of asking about after hearing about it, sometimes in some instances for the first time through watching that, and in some instances kind of using that scenario as though it was vetted, meaning it's been out for a little while and you've had a couple people say, wow, this is really, really great. And so we'll look at, is that even plausibly true and something that you should or shouldn't look at? Second thing that we'll look at is a recent study that came out where it said, the gist of the study said, if you have any scratches in your non-stick pans, you're basically eating plastic, like millions of particles of plastic, and you should throw this away. And so I wanted to not only revisit that, to look at the study a little bit, but more importantly say, because we've had questions about this in the past, what do we cook with? Why do we cook with that? And is there any potential benefit to it? And how do you use it? So we'll look at that. And then third and finally was questions that we had on my Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim, hopefully ×2 nutrition list. And so rather than just going through and reading you like a really boring narrative of what I'm planning to take on that trip as far as food, I broke it down into the four main categories that are the most important to me. And those four main categories are not your typical categories as far as the macros or the carbohydrates or anything really nutrition related. It's far more practical than that. So my hope in going through that is that you can take away something that is, of course, applicable to you, but also give you some things to think about if you're planning to do something that's on the bigger end of, something for you, whatever that might be. That could be something that is like a 10K that doesn't seem that big for some people, but it may be big for you. Hopefully it'll give you some ideas on things that you could potentially adjust and use in a situation like that as well. So first and foremost, looking back at this new product, this new supplement called Ketone IQ, what is it and does it work? So I think the first thing that's important to highlight when you look at a product or a supplement like this is, number one, what is it? Right? Especially for something like this. If you look at like a whey protein, most people are going to be familiar with that because the name itself insinuates exactly what it is and exactly what you're getting. But this is a little less familiar. So Ketone IQ is what we call an exogenous source of ketones. Now, exogenous basically just means that you're getting it from an external source. And that's important because up until a couple of years ago, that wasn't even a thing. Ketone bodies are produced inside of you as an alternative fuel source when you stop taking in carbohydrates. The diet on a ketogenic diet is generally really high in fat, very moderate, not high in protein, and then very low in carbohydrate. That's really important to remember as we move through the description of this, because when we get to the section where I'm trying to answer, does it work and should you take it? You have to remember that part of it. You have to remember, what are ketones? What is a ketogenic diet? And then look at, are these really going to be um, applicable to me? One thing that's really important to also point out when you look at ketone IQ is that it's a different type of exogenous ketone. So, exogenous, again, just means that you're getting it from an outside source, you're taking it in. Prior to this, remember, ketones are generated inside the body because of the diet that you are following. You're removing carbohydrates, your body produces ketones as an alternative fuel source to keep you alive and functioning. And so that is the essence of the ketogenic diet. Ketone IQ, there have been previous ketone products introduced, and they were in various forms. The forms among these different ketone products is really where you start to differentiate between them. What makes them different from one another, right? So you've got this host of ketone products, and the form in which they are giving those is what distinguishes between those different products. And I'll give you an example here in a minute, but something that we're familiar with would be like a whey protein. We use the name whey protein in a general sense to describe all protein powders. What this may be new news to you even, but those protein powders vary in quality based on the percentage of that powder that is actual protein versus what we'll call filler, right? And so you have a whey concentrate, you have a whey isolate, and you have a whey hydrolysate. And really, the differences between those is how much of the actual goods are in there versus how much of it is just filler. And so you could take that same idea and apply it here to the different ketone products that have existed for a while, because you may be thinking, well, yeah, ketone products are fairly new, but they're not brand new. So what makes this one so different, and why is everyone talking about it all of a sudden? And the answer to that question would be the various forms that they come in. So previously we've had ketone salts, we've had ketone esters, and ketone IQ is what they call a diol. Right now, I wouldn't worry so much about the names, but the major differences there is in what a person who takes these notices. And the greatest thing that they noticed is what type of energy that they may feel, and or whether or not it upsets their stomach. Right. And so the claim to fame with ketone IQ is that the form in which it delivers compared to past competitors is much easier on the stomach to digest than previous ones. And you get a very sustained level of energy rather than an erratic one that's, spikes and drops and is all over the place and very unpredictable. Right. And so the claim to fame to the ketone IQ, why it is, starting to grow in popularity compared to these other ones that didn't, is because you get just a more predictable rise. Now, remember that, because we're going to come back to that here again in a minute. Now, here's the question: does it work? Whether or not it works is largely going to be dependent on whether or not you follow that type of a diet. If you eat a diet that's fairly high in carbohydrate and you start taking a supplement that is designed to give you an alternative fuel source when you're low in carbohydrate, you're probably not going to feel the effects of that. Now, if you follow a ketogenic diet and you are looking for an alternative fuel source or an added fuel source in an endurance-based activity, could it work for you? It potentially could. You could view, like, as I started to think about how to answer this, I think you could view these ketone supplements, like the Gatorade for people who follow the ketogenic diet, or the gummy bears for people who follow the ketogenic diet. It is a fuel source that you can take in in a short notice on an endurance event, and it's going to deliver some fuel because it's the type of fuel that person's running off of because of the diet they have chosen to follow. So you can't necessarily say that it's going to benefit everyone. Now, I'll come back to that here again in a little bit. An important thing to remember in this is that even though all that might be true, we also know that the muscle turns over carbohydrate much faster than it does fat. So what I'm not saying is that this is a superior method of fueling yourself if you're planning to do an endurance-based activity. The other thing that I'm not saying, or that I'm reminding us of, is it's important to remember that when your body uses fat as fuel, that is not to say it is breaking down stored body fat and causing you to lose weight faster or anything like that. We did a podcast on this, gosh, I bet it was a year and a half ago, where we talked all about the differences between burning fat as fuel based on intensity of an endurance focused activity and burning body fat to literally lower your body fat. There is a difference there, and it's important that you know that so that you don't start following something under the premise that it's doing something that it's actually not. So all that's important to remember. Now, all of that said, and I hope that it made sense. And if it didn't, then you can always send me an email and I can clarify, or you can send me an email and yell at me or whatever. All of that said, the motto and the position that we have always taken with all supplements is this: assuming it's safe, assuming it's safe. If I say it doesn't work, if science says it doesn't work, or if you think it's just a placebo, if you feel like it changes your life, no matter what I say, you should take it, right? I mean, even if it's a placebo effect, if you feel like, man, this just makes my life so much better, it makes my performance so much better, it makes my energy so much better, whatever, and everything that I say goes against that, you should still take it because you notice a benefit, assuming it's a safe product, right? So I think that that's really important to remember too in this. And so if you tie that into like what a lot of the influencers are saying, I think that number one, remember they're getting paid, and they're getting paid a lot. And I do know that so during the world record pull-up attempts, I do know like Truett's, he was saying he was eating pancakes and waffles between sets as well. So, it's like, well, what was working there? So remember all of those things. But again, it's relatively inexpensive. It's simple enough to try. There's probably no, negative side effect from you trying it. So if you do that and you notice some sort of massive difference, knock yourself out. But if you don't, then I'd save my money and probably spend it elsewhere. So hopefully that explains that. I will link our previous podcast all about fat burning as fuel and fat burning to lose body fat and the differences there. I'll link that in the show notes. So if you haven't looked at that, you can go back and look at it. If you're relatively new to following the podcast, you probably haven't heard it because it's been a long time. And I highly doubt that it's showing up in your feed, even if you're going back through the archives and trying to find some of that stuff. So if you got any questions about it, send them to me and I would be more than happy to elaborate more. Number 2, what do you cook with? I just saw where a scratch skillet can release a lot of toxins and chemicals. So here's the background information on that, and then I'll answer this person's question more directly. Here's the background. A new study revealed that a single scratch on a non-stick pan can release up to 9,000 toxic microplastic particles into your food. That may or may not worry you. The bigger thing was that this same study basically said if the coating on that skillet's pretty damaged, more than one scratch, for example, that number jumps from 9,000 particles up to 2 million particles. And there's a fairly strong correlation between the ingestion of those over time and some not ideal health complications. So I think that is one of those things where it's like, if I can buy a new skillet pretty cheap and avoid this, I'm probably going to do it just because there is a pretty strong correlation that it's at least worth paying attention to. Now, with that said, I will preface this before answering the question. There are folks, even like fellow dietitians who live in the alarmists category, where any new study that comes out there, like overhauling life and aligning with that study. Lindsay and I don't live on that end. And then you have other people who are in the corner that say, we're all going to die one day. I'm going to do whatever I want. We don't live in that end either. For us, we try to live right in the middle, which is if we can control it, we're gonna, and it's easy and it's not like interfering with our life. We're gonna, why not do it, right? But we're also not gonna go. I'm not gonna go outside and not breathe in the air because there's potential pollution. Like I'm still gonna live in this country, so we try to live somewhere in the middle. This is one of those things where I think we try to live in the middle. So we cook, answering the question, we cook pretty much exclusively with cast iron. Part of that is because I like it. I mean, I love it. You get even heat distribution in the food. You can sear a steak if you want to. You don't have to replace it every year. I like anything that requires uh my input for the outcome. I like patinaed stuff. I like the fact that I have to keep up with the I like that I have a little bit of upkeep to make sure that cast iron lasts. I'm the same way with wood. I love doing woodworking projects where I have to sand and manipulate that and put a poly over it and make it look nice so it goes the distance. I like stuff like that. So that keeping that in mind, we mostly cook with cast iron. That can sound really, really high maintenance, but it's not. And here's some tips that I would give you if you're interested in moving that direction, so you're not buying these pans all the time. And that was one of the things that moved us towards this. I was just like, we're buying pans all the time because we cook so much. And it's like 2 weeks after you get a pan, there's one scratch in it. So I just got tired of dealing with it. I also like that I can just throw cast iron right in the oven. I don't have to, worry about there being rubber or metal in there, or I'm sorry, rubber or plastic in it. So the first thing, season it once and then don't worry about it anymore. Nowadays, you can find all sorts of instructions as far as seasoning a cast iron skillet, but most of them come seasoned. And seasoned basically means that there is already a layer of oil or protection coated into that cast iron so that things aren't going to stick to it. Years ago, when you bought cast iron, you had to season it, which required you putting a layer of oil on it, putting it in an oven, and kind of going back and through this method to establish a layer between that pan and anything that you cook so that nothing actually stuck to it. Most of them come pre-seasoned, but in an effort to keep that seasoning, don't ever use soap on it. And that can sound kind of weird because, you wash stuff, but even if you make something with a sauce, if cast iron is seasoned well, it will come right out with no soap after you get done cooking. So you could have a mess in that skillet, but if you take some warm water and a stiff bristled brush, that'll come right out. You won't have to worry about it at all. So the second thing or the third thing, whatever number we're on, is that when you get finished using it, I just take some cooking spray, put a light thing on there, take a paper towel, and then wipe that all around it so it doesn't get any surface rust on it. And aside from that, there is no maintenance. In fact, I would say that there is less maintenance than there are with nonstick skillets because I don't have to soak the skillet and go back and, deal with all of that. I basically take it to the sink, stiff bristled brush, warm water, rub it out, light layer of cooking spray, set it aside. Third reason or fourth reason, and probably nerdiest of all, or the next two, is from a nutritional front. Number one, cooking with cast iron skillet increases the iron content of the food. And so even though I'm not like spending lots of time at Everest, I like my iron content, iron content in my food to be fairly high because it's hard to come by. And then I just don't have to ever worry about whether or not I'm getting oxygenated blood. And so I love the fact of knowing that anything that I cook is automatically getting some additional nutritional benefit to it because it's cooked in cast iron. And anytime we're able to try to add a source of vitamin C to that so that it enhances the iron uptake. So vitamin C, when added with iron, enhances the uptake of that iron so you actually get and absorb more. And that can be a lot simpler than it sounds. That's adding bell peppers to steak if you're making fajitas. It's adding red sauce to ground beef if you're making sloppy joes, or if you're making spaghetti sauce or tacos or anything. So anything with cyan, vitamin C added iron automatically increases the uptake of that iron. And then obviously that is a nutritional advantage to you. So while I don't, go to somebody's house and bring my own cast iron skillet if I see that they're cooking with a nonstick pan, we do cook with cast iron for a lot of different reasons. And it's a lot easier maintenance than it sounds like. And I have like the alternative that you will find if you start reading through this news article that came out and this study that came out is they'll suggest stainless as well. Stainless to me just makes an absolute mess. I've never had good luck cooking with stainless, unless it's with water or something liquid, the way that I have with cast iron. So maybe that'll give you an alternative and something else to think about. Number 3, what are you taking to the Grand Canyon to cover 100 miles? Do you have a food list? Are you doing a podcast about this? I'm sure we'll do a podcast about this once we get done and we'll see how many of those 100 miles we can cover. But I wanted to go through the food list, and it was a great question. But rather than lull you to sleep by reading through a food list like it's some sort of a novel, I want to go back and try to categorize everything that I'm taking in basically in 4 different categories to help paint the picture. So the first category is liquid calories. There's a couple of reasons I go this route, and there's a couple of products that I've experimented with over the years, and I've kind of resolved on one or potentially two. So number one of the main reasons that I like a liquid source of carbohydrate is the formulation for those generally have multiple types of carbohydrates. What's unique about us is that our intestines, our small intestines in our stomach, take up those carbohydrates in different areas, right? So, like, the best analogy that I've come up with this is if you remember years ago before online shopping and Amazon was a thing, they had Black Friday sales. And when you would show up, if there was a product there and they would often only open one door, and that door would get completely congested with people. And so what seems like it shouldn't require that much work to move that many people through a door required long periods of time to get everybody in because there was only one door there. And I always thought, well, if they would open multiple doors, and I think with Best Buy, they had 6 doors. I remember this as a kid. They could get all of these people in within minutes. And this is the same way with these multiple source carbohydrates. If you only had one point of entry for one type of carbohydrate, it would get congested. You could only take in so much in such a period of time. Because there's multiple sources, it's entering at 3 different locations. And ultimately, what that allows is it allows you to take in more fuel in a shorter period and then, in theory, give you better performance. And so, from a, I guess from a nerd like standpoint, I like knowing that there's something in my plan that is multiple source carbohydrate so that if I need to get something in, it can take a lot in a short period of time without making me too sick. And that's often what you'll feel. If you try to shove too much in too fast and it's in one door, you know, analogy here, but if you're trying to squeeze too much in one location at once, Often part of that goes undigested, and that's when you start to feel sick and nauseous because of too much, usually people say too much sugar too fast. And that's often why. So I like knowing there's a multiple source carbohydrate. Number two, it's really easy to get it in. I put, a lot of guys will run Nalgene bottles on stuff like this, and I do keep one, but what I've gone to using now are those really cheap green Gatorade bottles with a lid on, with an orange lid that like football players will use, and you just squeeze it. There is no top. The liquid doesn't come out, but if you squeeze it, then it does. So I can easily move and pull that bottle out, squeeze some, take a hit here, take a hit there, and it's an extremely lightweight bottle, and so I use those. It's really, really easy for me to get that in while I'm moving. I don't have to stop. I find with an Nalgene that I've got to stop. I've got to take off the lid, or it's splashing on me, and so I tend to drink less because I'm only drinking when I stop, and I don't want to stop. So I've just found that having some kind of liquid calories is good. There's a lot of different products that you could use, ranging from as cheap as your over-the-counter Gatorade, which I've often recommended, to really expensive, formulated products. I've liked and used Gatorade a lot. I still do, especially if it's on hunts, just because it's cheap and we hunt so much that, it's nice to have. But I do really, really, really like Tailwind, especially on something like the Grand Canyon, because my appetite isn't great because I'm moving so much. And Tailwind is really, really subtle. It's not too sweet. There's a little bit of saltiness to it. And that tends to just, for me, sit a lot better than something really, really sweet like Gatorade. So you got a lot of options. Can't go wrong. It's largely going to be personal preference. One of the cool things about a lot of these companies is they've started selling individual packets. And so, you can buy a packet for $3 to try it, to try a flavor before you go all in on a big package. It costs you 30 to $50 with multiple different servings in it. And so, I'd encourage you just to play with a lot of different ones and see, which one sits the best with you, and then start stocking up and going with it. Once you find what works, that's what works. Number two, fast acting carbohydrates. And these are going to be your typical gummy bears. Although I've got to be honest, I'm saying it here on the podcast. This year we're going gummy nerds and gummy lifesavers. Maybe gummy bears will make it, but they are all doing essentially the same thing. But I like something that I can dose. My problem with goo packets or the gels is that once you crack it open, you're fully committed. And this goes back to the multiple source carbohydrate thing from earlier. I don't really want 30 grams of carbohydrate in this sticky syrup in one sitting. What I love about, choose your candy du jour, whether it's gummy bears, gummy worms, nerds, Twizzler, whatever, is you can pick it. If I want 3 or 4, then I can eat 3 or 4. If I want an entire pack, then I can eat an entire pack. I can dose it however I want. And so I've always got something like that in there as a part of it as well. Number three, maybe most important, most unique, something you've not heard of, is something slow digesting with some fat and sustenance to it. A really important thing to keep in mind and remember in something like this is it is very possible for you to not get it, or it is very possible for you to get enough calories, but the food volume not be high enough so you're hungry. Right? You've got plenty of fuel so you can continue on, but you still have that gnawing pit in your stomach, like there's nothing there. And that's a lot to deal with for 18 plus hours in a day if you're on something like this. So I started adding something in there that's going to provide, it's going to make me feel like I've actually had something to eat. And this came in the form of DIY, just a bar that I've made and take to Alaska. And this is either the Audrey bars like we've talked about in the past, or the bars that Mark makes. We've got the recipe for both of those on the website, so I will link that in the show notes as well. But those are really, really dense, made with oats. There's peanut butter, protein powder. And so it's another really great vehicle to get some protein in. I've tried drinking protein drinks on these type of things, and that is just a no-go. I cannot eat meat. Meat sounds repulsive on these bigger endurance pushes. So, I've tried to find some ways to be creative and sneak some protein in, and this seems to be a really great one. So something to really provide some sustenance to it, and these are really calorie dense. If I remember right, they're coming in at somewhere between 300 and 400 calories per muffin, and I'm putting 2 per pack. So I'm usually eating 2 packs per day. So you're looking at close to 1,600 calories of these with, pushing 30 to 60 grams of protein. So they're really, really great. They're a really, really great option if you're looking for something to fill that kind of sustenance type of thing without eating candy and sugar and stuff all day. Number 4, I try to find stuff that's got a lot of salt in it. This isn't just to replace the electrolytes that I'm losing, although that is important. This is to try to help combat some of the nausea that can come on too. So funny story, we started the Grand Canyon hike last year. We went all the way in the canyon, went across the bottom, went to go up the north rim, and I started to just get really, really bad waves of nausea, which has not happened to me a lot. Make it to the north rim. There's some guys that are leaving right as we're getting there, and then there's some other guys that are still there. One of those guys, his name was Brigham, and he had come with us on this hike. And so I had a bagel with peanut butter and bacon on it, which normally I love. But at this stage of the game, the bagel had soaked up the oil from the peanut butter. And so trying to gnaw through this thing was nearly impossible. And I look over at Brigham, and he pulls out what looked like the most delectable, delicious, perfect bag of Fritos that I had ever seen. And I didn't know him very well at the time. But so I kept my mouth shut, but I was thinking I would pay you a lot of money for a handful of those Fritos right now. And so I started adding a lot of foods that are really more on the salty side as opposed to the sweet side, just because of that. It tends to be a nice balance when you've got a whole bag full of really, really sweet stuff. The other thing that I add, this is a staple. I've talked about this before. This is probably, falls into more of the weird category for a lot of people, is instant mashed potatoes. Those things are pushing almost 800 milligrams of sodium per serving, which is a heavy, heavy dose. But talk about combating that nausea. As we were going up the North Rim last year, that was the only thing that pulled me out. That was the only thing I could get down. So they require absolutely no heat. They require very little amounts of water. You can mix them to the texture that you want, and they are just excellent for, decent, fast digesting carbohydrates, something that's not sweet. It's going to make you feel like you've actually had something to eat. Great hit of salt. So I love them for all those reasons. They're really cheap. They're easy to package. You could just put them in your pack and eat them straight out of the package if you wanted to as well. So we've got instant mashed potatoes on that list this year. I've got Fritos on that list this year. Shout out to our friend Brian Chapman, who's bringing those over as he's driving, so I don't have to worry about him getting crushed in the luggage. And then probably some sort of like a roll up with a tortilla and some mustard, maybe a couple pieces of salami or something that tends to sit well with me, as opposed to, I said earlier, meat's repulsive. It's like jerky and stuff like that. So I will link the food list from this year in the show notes so you guys can check that out if you are interested. But I like some form of liquid calories for the reasons I mentioned. I like some sort of fast acting carbohydrate that I can get in. If I start to feel low, it's going to boost me up pretty fast. I like something that's going to digest slow and make it feel like there's some actual sustenance in the gut. It's not just all sugar and gummy stuff. And I like something with a lot of salt. So hopefully that gives you guys quite a bit of different options. Again, I'll share the list of everything in there so you can come look at it. And I will share the link to the previous podcast that we did on slow digesting fats and whether or not you're burning fat for fat adaptation. Or so thank you guys so much for joining us again this week. If you got any questions, you can send them to us at info@v2pnutrition.com. We got a lot of other really cool episodes that we are excited about coming up here soon. Lindsay and I are doing one on kids. We've gotten a ton of questions about how to, teach your kids nutrition, how to get them active, so we're going to do a topic strictly focused on that, plus some other exciting stuff. We got some exciting announcements coming up about the backcountry nutrition course that is actually live now. If you want, we'll do a special on that though, and then version 2 of our dehydrate guide. So thank you for joining us. We'll be back again in another couple of weeks. We look forward to you joining us then. Have a great week, everyone.